Good afternoon. My name is Ana Cătăuță, and I am an Aspen Institute Romania Fellow, and I'm also the External Affairs Officer of the World Bank in Romania and Hungary. My guest today is a highly esteemed professional with a very interesting life story. Born in Romania in the eve of the Second World War, he went from a Soviet-style labor camp in Romania to first-class education at Exeter, Princeton, and Stanford, and continued on to Young Rubicam, where he rose through the ranks to become chairman and CEO. He is now a prestigious author and speaker devoted to equality and opportunity for all Americans. His remarkable experience of hardship and oppression combined with his business career gave him a unique perspective on the challenges our society is facing today. Most recently, he has been a leading advocate of business governance transition from shareholder primacy to shareholder capitalism. Good evening, Peter. How are you?
Good evening to you. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and congratulations. What I hope has been an ongoing terrific forum, the Bucharest Forum 2020, and with grateful appreciation to both Aspen and to GMF for supporting and sponsoring this event. So well done to you all.
Thank you so much. So here's what I propose. I propose that we divide this conversation into three parts. We're going to start with your incredible life story. Then we will try to discuss a little bit on the current economic illness and social collapse that can be attributed in large part to the short-term thinking generated by shareholder primacy. And then we will take some questions from the participants. So you were born, like I said in the introduction, you were born in Romania in the eve of the Second World War, but you were very soon separated from your parents. Why did that happen?
Well, I wish, Anna, first of all, I wish that my Romanian was as good as your English. But my
Thank you.
mother passed away about 12, 15 years ago, and that was my last bit of conversation in Romanian, which we always had. But my fluency is a little bit lagging in Romanian. I do, however, remember very clearly the reunion with my parents. Actually, I left my parents when I was a few months old on the eve of the war. My father was put in prison by the Antonescu regime of Romania. And so we were reunited in 1945, the end of 1945. It was my brother Costa, who was 5 years older, my mother, myself. And I do have recollection of that time. I was 6 years old. And I remember my father running behind me, hanging on to the bike in my first adventure on a bike on Grigore Mora, the street where we lived.
That was in
And
Lipova,
so,
right?
no, this was in Grigore Mora in
Grigore Mora.
Bucharest. That's where we became a family. We left Lipova in the Banat, where I spent the war years with my grandparents, and we reunited in Bucharest. And then, with less than a year and a half after this almost idyllic life with my parents and my brother, my parents came to New York because my father had worked before the war. He was the general manager of the largest oil field in Romania, which was owned by a subsidiary of Standard Oil, an American company, Exxon. And so he went in early 1947 to a general managers meeting in New York. And it was just at that moment that the Iron Curtain comes down across all of Eastern Europe. And now the communist regimes take over, and the Iron Curtain became quite impenetrable. And my father and mother immediately made plans to come to Romania. Now, the fact that my father was imprisoned by the Germans, and when he was in prison, he worked with the OSS. And that was an important fact in my survival, because friends of my father's in New York, as the Iron Curtain came down, told him, by the way, these are the people who started the CIA in a few short years after that. And they told him that they had information that my father was on a list to be killed, to be captured by the Romanian communist regime and to be killed along with my mother. So they convinced my father, there's no point for you to go back to Romania. You'll be killed there. They can't help your kids. So you got to stay here. And that was turned out to be our salvation. But we didn't know that any of this at the time. We're in Romania. And after a few short months, the communication between America and Romania ceased to exist. And certainly years later. But in any case, we went back to Lipova, where I spent the war years, went back to school there. I became a pioneer. I remember my red cravat that I wore.
How old were you then?
And, excuse
How
me,
old were you?
I must have been about 7 when I started. I think that was when when one became a pioneer.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure what happened dress wise when you graduated from that. I never got to that stage, but I had to go to school with a red cravat. And anyway, so life was that. And then shortly thereafter, my grandfather was arrested in the middle of the night, one night. They poisoned our dogs and came over the fence and arrested him. And we never saw him again, of course. Only many years later, after 89, did we find out that he was sent to Siget and murdered in Siget. Shortly after my grandfather got arrested, my brother, myself, and my grandmother were also arrested. Well, it was weird. We weren't really arrested. The idea was that we were going to go to a place from where we would go on a journey to meet my parents. Okay? So we ended up in Urziceni. And in Urziceni, it became very clear that we were prisoners. We weren't going anywhere outside Romania. We were prisoners. And and I worked for that summer in a collective farm. And then shortly thereafter, we ended up in Bodoșani, where we spent most of our time in hard labor in Romania. And it was hard labor. They took a room out of somebody's home. Our bed became some fresh hay and a couple of blankets, and that was it. That was the furniture in the room. We had a hot plate of oil, and that was the cooking area, and that was life. Outhouse in the back and a well in the back, and we went to work at 6 in the morning and came back between 6 and 7 o'clock at night. And we had to stop on the way to the Russian store, rationing cards, where you had to present a card that would tell you how much food you could have. And that was life, 6 days a week. And on Sundays, we basically just never woke up. We just slept to catch up. So that was life, except for occasional, what the interrogation sessions. Basically, they were brainwashing devices to tell us how horrible our parents were, um, how evil they were because they're not friends of Romania and doing damage to Romania, how terrible my parents were, etc. They never quite explained, therefore, why are you here? If the problem was your parents, why are you here working, cleaning sewers for a bunch of time, then digging holes for electric poles, then I work in high tension wires, did lots of other things. So,
They, sorry to interrupt. So they
yeah,
did tell you this for years. Did you ever come to believe them? Did you ever think that what they were saying was true? You were just a child then.
no, well, I wasn't so much of a child. You become a adult pretty quickly under the circumstances. And did I believe them about my parents? Absolutely not. And that was the extraordinary importance of my grandmother, who was with us. She was in house arrest, basically. She couldn't go anywhere. For the first 6 or 8 months, I can't remember exactly, we had a secret policeman sitting outside our apartment door. So where were we going to go? You couldn't go. Nobody could go to the next town without a police permit. So, but anyway, so she was in house arrest, but she was very important psychologically. And The reality was that pretty quickly, within the first less than a year, it became obvious that this was going to be our life for the rest of our life. There was no way out. As I said, you couldn't go next door, let alone, and how were we going to go out? So there was not even a discussion. We never discussed. My grandmother had this vague idea that good things would happen. We didn't believe that. I mean, the reality was we got up in the morning, we went to work, we came home, we ate something, went to sleep, and life was like that. And for all we knew, that was it for the rest of our lives. There
You,
was no
you,
there was no possible psychological escape from that, right?
you talk in your book, The Constant Choice, about good and evil. Um, I can imagine what the evil was then in your life, but was there any good thing that happened? Was there any sunshine? Anything that made you hope that you will see your parents again?
No, I didn't. I don't think we had hoped to see our parents again ever. No, that we did not have. We didn't discuss it. We didn't debate it. I think that was part of the way we dealt with it. We didn't talk about it at all, except when we came back from full of dread and fear. I was separated from my brother when we were interviewed separately, and they were really bullying basically, and I was terrified inside. But my way of coping was to yell back, and I would yell at them, telling them that they were telling lies, that it wasn't true, and this kind of thing. But I was inwardly terrified. But I created a survival strategy for myself. I had this fantasy that if I worked hard enough, I could convince the powers that be that I was really an extraordinary asset for the Romanian government. Look how hard I can work. I can work as hard as anybody else. I had, of course, no idea why we were even kept alive, but that didn't occur to me.
But you were
And
a young adult, not a child, working
well,
in
yes,
sewerage.
still a little bit adult, and without the full comprehension and the cognitive brain skill to put it all together. And so I developed a very simple strategic idea for myself, which I never discussed with my brother or my grandmother, which was to say, work hard enough, Peter, you'll prove your worth, and that's your path forward.
And do you
And I
think it?
received I received some form of encouragement because after a year or so of working in the sewers, or whatever time it was, they changed my ration card from whatever color to the blue. And the blue was the most amount of food you can get as a worker in Romania was the blue card in those days. And they gave me a blue card. And so I said, aha, you see, it's working, Peter. So keep working harder. So I almost killed myself working hard. I got sick at some point in time because my immune system, we didn't have quite enough calories for the work I was doing. And probably my immune system became deficient. So I almost died. But anyway, I recovered and went back to work hard enough. Meanwhile, in New York, totally unbeknownst to us, there was another drama. Of course, we had no communication. We knew nothing. We were in a total cocoon.
Yeah.
And then in New York, it became apparent to my parents, who probably were worried, why are they keeping the kids alive? What's going on? Where are they? They had no idea where we were, or that we're working, or where my grandfather was, nothing. So, but it became clear why we were kept alive in Romania, which was to spy, to blackmail my father to spy for Romania. And that became a cause célèbre. The story went public. My father went to the press and with the advice of the FBI, and so it became a very public event in America. And
You mentioned.
then, and
Sorry.
go ahead. I'm sorry, Anna.
Now I that made me remember that a few months ago in an interview for Bloomberg, you said that it doesn't matter what happens to you, it doesn't define you, but why, but how. Sorry. Has this
Well,
experience defined you as a young adult, and later, did it help you in your professional career?
it certainly didn't define me, but what it did do is the realization that the good or bad stuff that happens to you does not define you. What does define you is how you respond. What is your reaction? What is your response to that? And I learned the sense of resiliency, self-resiliency inside myself. And as a young child, it was easy to just, as I said, I just work harder. But that translated in future years in whenever you confront you with a problem, find a way out, find a solution, and that defines who you are. You may succeed or you may not succeed, but that's your character, your personality, your persona is defined by how you respond to adversity. I learned that early on, and that served me very well. And I learned something else that was very important. I learned that at the end of the day, I always had to depend on myself. But in America, I learned something else. I learned the extraordinary number of people of goodwill who reached out and helped me, like the congresswoman who read the story in 1953 and got involved with President Eisenhower to get us out. She had no reason to do it except a sense of concern and compassion for a really tragic reality against two, by then my parents had become American citizens, knowing they could never go back to communist Romania. But she said, how can foreign adversaries do that to American citizens? She wanted to fix it. And the headmaster of this wonderful school where I went said, call my father. And my father protested and said, look, this kid doesn't speak a word of English in April of 54. And you're inviting him 4 months later to enter an elite school. And he hasn't gone to school for a bunch of years.
Before we get to that, let
But
us
wait
get
a
a
minute,
little bit back to Romania. So, how many years did you
back
spend
to,
in
okay.
Botoșani, and how did you manage to get out of it?
Oh, well, it wasn't us. That was the deal that was made by President Eisenhower. And I don't remember, well, from everything I can tell, what happened at the end of the blackmail story was that President Eisenhower made a deal with the Russians. And we got traded, best I understand, from CIA records. They never kept specific records of the CIA in those days deliberately, but they could tell usually what they did. I talked to some of the CIA operatives years and years later, in the 2000s actually, and they looked back and they said, probably what happened, you got traded for a bunch of Russian spies that we had here, and your brother and I, and your brother and yourself got traded for a bunch of Russian spies. That's probably what happened.
But you did not know at the time
Had
this.
nothing. No, we knew nothing about nothing. One day they say you're going to Bucharest to stay with your uncle, Ionel Manolescu, who was a very famous artist at the time, and that you go and join your parents. And it will just take a couple of weeks to get your passport to get out of Romania. We were totally stunned, totally stunned. So, yeah.
So here
So a
in
new
Europe,
life happened, began in America.
so you were about 15 when this happened.
I was exactly 15, yes.
You went to America. The only word you knew was Coca-Cola. The only word in English you knew was Coca-Cola. And yet, 3 months later, you managed to be the student of a highly prestigious school like Exeter, and then Princeton, and then Stanford. You mentioned in your book the guardian angels. Who were your guardian angels after you arrived in America?
My goodness, Anna, I had so many along the way, but I think clearly Frances Payne Bolden, this woman, congresswoman, who is just a remarkable woman. She was, if you can think, in 1953, even in America, she was the only female in the House of Representatives. And she was not only there, she was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress. She had met with Stalin personally and wrote a report in 1952 saying this leader is committed to destroying America. That was his intent. And in fact,
He was.
she helped Eisenhower become president of the United States, which is one of the reasons that I think she had serious influence in her ability to convince Eisenhower to intervene personally to get us out of Romania. So he was, I mean, she was at the top of the list, and so was this principal of Exeter, because the quality education I got in the 3 years, I spent 3 years at Exeter, because he asked me what class did I wanted to be in, and I said I want to be in with boys my own age. He said, "What difference does it make? You'll become a sophomore at Exeter." Okay, and she said, "If you can pass on your own the courses, you can stay here. If not, we'll find the right school for you." I I managed to do just that, and eventually things worked out, and I got an excellent education throughout, and that enabled me to live what is called the American dream, which was really basically, and still is today, is to be able to look in the mirror and say, "Are you as good as you can be? Is this the best Peter Georgescu can be?" And I can look in the mirror and say, "Yeah, yeah, I am the best that I can think I can be." I get a chance to do that, and how fortunate for me and how grateful I am to so many people, to the American people who created the scandal that forced Francis Bolton and Eisenhower to take action, and other wonderful people. And along the way, so many other good people have helped me along the way, which, by the way, happens to everybody, including you, Anna, including every listener, successful person that they may be. You're here, you're there, because a lot of people have done wonderful things to help you along the way. That's how the system works. That's how we humans respond and how it works at this time in our lives.
That's very, very impressive. You mentioned the American dream. Before I go, so my second question will be if the American dream is still possible today, the American dream that you described. But first, let me ask you a more a wider question that will give us a little bit of context. So in Capitalist Arise, you talk about the mission of business, but for countries like Romania, where the social protection system and the state in itself is very important, the question might be, why is business so important?
Well, at the end of the day, if you look historically at what has transpired, capitalism has proven to be the most extraordinary, powerful creator of prosperity and growth that humankind ever invented. The truth of the matter is that socialism, in the sense of control, socialism defined as control of the means of production and distribution. Communism was an ideology, it was not an economic strategy. It was a strategy for a group of people to take power away from the other people. It's as simple as that. As they prove to pretend that there's an ideology to help people was nonsense. But the idea was that the government can control and produce significantly better results than the free market system that capitalism can produce. And it proved out to be absolutely destructive. And that's what happened. The Soviet Union collapsed because the economic system of communism and socialism failed. And other countries around the world, Britain sort of tried to play around with socialism a bit, and the Scandinavian country did for a while, but they all changed and became capitalistic with a very strong social safety net. But at the end of the day, the thing that produced wealth and prosperity in all these nations, including America, was capitalism. So that's why business is so important. Business is the creator. Like in America, for example, business contributes some $20 trillion to the economy. The government, about $5 trillion. Most of that money is spent on fundamental stuff, basic stuff to help the safety net and so forth, but it doesn't create growth and prosperity. Only capitalism does that. And but the second, so I'm unequivocal about that. I believe capitalism is absolutely fantastic. However, there's another lesson to be had, a little complication, and that is it's not just capitalism that is important, because it is. And by the way, every successful country in the world, including China today, China's economic system is based on capitalism. Make no mistake about it, totally capitalism. However, the distinction is who benefits from the notion of capitalism. And that's, in English, the word is governance. I'm not sure there's a Romanian equivalent for the word, but it's the rules of the game, basically.
It's
What are the rules of
guvernanza.
the game? Governance,
Guvernanza.
Asha.
Yeah.
Asha. So, so that's the critical point. Who benefits from the prosperity and growth being produced? And in China, it's the government, basically. And it works. Capitalists can do that. In America, after the war, capitalism was designed to help the workers, to help the communities, to help the shareholders, and to help the corporation. And it worked magically because America became the most dominant force in the world at the time during those 40 years. And it also built the largest economic market, which was the middle class in America, because workers were paid a lot of money, a fair amount of money. And as the increases in productivity happened, the wages went up. So there was a one-to-one correlation for 40 years. And all of that stopped in America in the early 1980s. And there was a real, let's say, collusion, conspiracy between government of Ronald Reagan and business. And all of a sudden, now business's mission, as supported by the apostle, which was Milton Friedman, the American economist, said that the role of business is simply to create wealth for the shareholders, that the shareholder owned the corporations, and therefore they deserve all the profits as much as possible whenever they want it, which meant every quarter. So that became for 40 years how American business was developed. And in its tracks of the 40 years, we have seen the development of a horrific inequality. So from an America, which was the most democratic nation, the most equalitarian nation, the most mobile society, society mobility is measured by the ability of an individual to go from the lowest rank to the top ranks in a lifetime. So America was the best at that and became, in the among developed nations, the worst at that. So that's where the story is today. 40 years from, almost 40 years after the early 1980s, we find ourselves in a country where the American dream is only available to about 25 or so percent of the country, which is the plutocrats, us successful people with kids that go to great schools, who get tutors, who get help, who go to summer camps and so forth and so on. The vast majority of America don't have access to that. So that's
So,
what has happened in
so
America.
if you were to, if let's say that you have a child that is a refugee in America today, his chances of becoming the CEO of Young Rubicam, for instance, are almost none.
Worse than an immigrant that came in at age 15. That's the point. Meaning me. I could do it then. I would never have been able to do it now. Never. And that's the tragedy that is America. That's what has to be fixed in America. That's what this election in about 3 weeks is going to be all about in America. And it's a very important one. It's the soul. You see, capitalism is this, as I said, this wonderful, wonderful factory of growth and prosperity. But it doesn't matter unless the governance is right. China doesn't have to have democracy to have capitalism. America that pretends to want democracy has to have a different version of capitalism. It cannot survive with shareholder primacy. So that's why in America, some form of stakeholder capitalism, by stakeholder capitalism, I mean serving the benefiting many other people, like the workers, the community, the environment, the corporation itself, the suppliers of the corporation. All of those are important stakeholders. The community in which you do business, paying people fairly, decently, not exploiting people. For 40 years, basically, the workers in America, the employees, not just workers, I'm saying the vast majority of there are about 180 million people working in America, and most of them, or at least 70% of them, their wages have been flat for 40 years with inflation, but not growing beyond inflation for 40 years. That was horrendous.
You mentioned the elections that are coming. Do you think that Mr. Sanders' influence on the Democratic Party and their discussions about going more to the left, has this really impacted the Democratic Party in its structure, or is it just a publicity stunt to draw more voters? Do you think they really understood that they have to be more careful to the employees' needs, or is it something that it's helpful in an electoral campaign?
No, I don't think there's anything phony about Bernie Sanders, and he believes totally that. And look here, I think within the Democratic Party, and not just the Democratic Party, many other people, they know now change is essential. If you remember, in 2016, Trump was the most populist
Yes.
contender. And basically, what happened, unfortunately, he's also the most capricious liar known to mankind. So he's worked for 4 years against the interests of, of those people. However, they don't know that. They don't know that. And they believe just because he's being attacked by the Democrats and others, including the many Republicans who are attacking Trump because he's not doing the right thing for the country. But they believe the more he's being attacked, the more they believe, he's really fighting for us. And it's sadly and tragically like any dictator, and we've seen dictators win, whether it was Mussolini, whether it was Hitler, whether it was Stalin. Autocratic leaders have a way of making themselves, ingratiating themselves to the masses. And that's one of the tragedy of the human condition, that we're able to be, seduced by these powerful personas who claim that they are all for us when in fact they're not. And so this is for America an existential challenge. And I, that's not what Bernie Sanders worries me. What worries me sometimes is the distrust in government. Governments have a very important role to play, not to be corrupted. And, and corruption in government is prevalent in too many places, whether it's Eastern Europe or America or Latin America and other parts of Europe as well. And honest government is critically important because honest government worries about the common good of all the people. That is what it is intended to do. And if we pretend to be a democracy, we have to go back to those fundamental principles, those values, those back to good and evil, back to where I came from. And the one thing that I know, I join many people here, but I learned a really hard lesson. I just told myself all my life, I said, don't ever, or try your best, your hardest, no matter how good it may be for you, never behave and do evil unto other people, like all those people did to my grandfather, to my grandmother, to my parents, and obviously to me as well. That is that is evolutionary, the worst that the human condition can be. And we have to walk away from those bad genes of ours in every country, from Romania to America. Ultimately, we've got to become better people.
I'm going to challenge
And
you a little bit
that's
now.
when
You mentioned
that's the
China
secret, that's
earlier.
the
Do you
secret
think that the
sauce.
rise of China, no, let me put it the other way. Do you think that China took advantage of the fact that the American dream has been fading away in the last decades?
Probably.
And is America still the most influential country in the world?
Well, I don't know that. You know, you can see a path, you can see a journey. And America is certainly is not today on the ascent. That's for sure. And China is. And China is. And so the problem is not China. The problem is America and what we're doing to ourselves. And the only people who can fix America's problem is the American people.
And
And I'm
why
optimistic.
aren't, and it seems like they are not doing it. Why?
Well, look, I think that what I've learned, one of the things I've learned in business is a simple, profound reality. Only when you understand the problem in depth can the right solution happen. And part of the problem for America over the last 20 or so years has been an undeniable denial of what the reality really is, denial of the level of inequality we had, denial of some of the racial exploitation and the bigotry that still exists. One of the blessings you can ever say that about the pandemic and COVID is that COVID all over the world has exposed all of these realities. Now it's undeniable that the inequality has created the most horrendous problem. These people became the most vulnerable people in the pandemic. That the rich plutocrats have had ways to protect themselves from the pandemic so much better and get the better healthcare and so forth than the majority of Americans. And so it is I'm optimistic because I think now we understand the problem in depth. And now the challenge is our willingness, the will to fix the problem. We know what it is. We know what needs to be done. I think the majority of American people have the right values, and they're saying it's time for us to turn the corner and become the kind of people that we have experienced before. But more importantly, the people who in the 21st century can create a life that is a life of meaning and a life of purpose and a sort of sense of goodness. And I come back to the issue. The winners long term are going to be the nations where the people themselves are going to embrace a set of values and a set of purpose of really a meaningful, purposeful life. And where the evils that happen in Romania to me and happen in America to other people cease to exist to a large degree, and where the corruption of power stops existing, where people in power do things only to serve themselves and their narcissistic and entitled behavior. That's what communism was nothing except a power grab of another set of plutocrats. They were plutocrats by any other name. For 60 years, they survived, but they failed because the system doesn't support that. It was not in the interest of the people. And we have to learn from that and choose who do we want to be. And I think to some degree, I think the Trump regime has held a mirror to the American people and say, hey, is this who all of you want to be? Is this how we should behave as people, as a country? And now we have an opportunity. If we had this conversation maybe 4 weeks from now, I would be in a better position to tell you specifically with certainty where I think the country is going. But right now, I think that the choice is an existential choice for America's democracy,
Well, I do hope that
for
we're
all
going
the
to have
reasons I
many more
mentioned.
conversations from now on. You mentioned the pandemic. Do you think that this is a turning point in the human history?
Well, it's one turning point, right around the corner. And this is why I think we as people must come together and really choose to adopt a different set of values. Because pandemics, this is not the last pandemic we're going to have. This is not right around the corner. I can tell you what the next pandemic is for sure. There may be more than one, but I can tell you what it is. It's called climate change. And it's right here, it's right with us now. And the devastation of that pandemic will make COVID seem like the common, not even the flu, the common cold. That's insignificant compared to the devastating possibilities of climate change if we don't aggressively embrace that issue and work not just as one country, but as the human condition to fix this problem for our own survival. And as I said, the consequences are in the hundreds of millions of people will be affected because they won't have enough water, or they won't have a home because the sea levels is going to rise to that degree, and and woods are going to be burning as they are burning in California today in the United States, millions of acres. That's climate change. And the hurricanes, another one just hit, and they're hitting like it's scary what is happening with the hurricanes that are hitting America, the south part of America, in the Gulf particularly, because that's the direction of the warm water, takes it right into the Gulf of Mexico. And so these pandemics, we have to realize that we are all connected, that America cannot be just 25% of us doing great and having average numbers that are terrific. But you can take that analogy and put it to the human condition and say the human condition must work together in a collaborative fashion, all of us. So, yes, the EU, China, America, these are the major forces of tomorrow. And we all have got to collaborate together and put out the ridiculous fires and problems that exist around the world and so forth. And even though we have not had major wars, we've had enough wars even through today. Look at the devastation of what happened in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, and horrific things that it just doesn't work. And the threat of the nuclear weapons, which are still not fully dealt with. So we have many problems for us to solve. And we can only do that if we choose to live on our better angels instead of the narcissistic, the entitled, the selfish, and the greedy part that we learned in millions of years of living in the African jungles. And those are the genes we still have in us. And we have to fight them and we have to win. And that may be, in fact, the biggest battle we humans for ourselves to become better people who can survive in a world that we can help create for us to be able to exist in the future.
Coming back to solutions, because you mentioned that this is one of the solutions, but is education also a solution? And what role does education play in the welfare of a society?
Well, I start with business because I think nothing good can happen to a country unless business really produces the resources that are needed to do good things. And at the top of the list of the byproducts of what business, if you will, success can be, is education. I can't think of anything more important after business than education, because without the essential elements to keep a family together, to provide the support system that children have, you can't get good things to happen. So education is critical. And I would start not at the top, but at the bottom. I would start at the bottom, meaning age bottom. I think from the age of 3, I think that's where it starts. That's where cognitive development must start. Every child must have the ability to help develop their own brains, and then they must go in the high schools of this world, the equivalent from 6-year-old onwards. And they have to be equality of education for all children is critical and goes all the way up. And there are plenty of good examples of this working well. And trade schools are important because not everybody needs to be brain scientists. So we need people who are great at the trade things, and you can make great living and success for families, and be the best you can be by being great at being an electrician and a carpenter and so forth, a welder. And you don't all have to be programmers in the computer world, or manipulate money in the banking system. So there are lots of ways to be successful, and we have examples in Europe, in particular, good examples. Look at I would single out Germany, and their education system is working pretty darn well. Inequality is among the lowest in the world, and so they're good examples that we can learn from each other, and have the humility to be able to look at other people and say, what can we learn? But we always come back to education means the ability to be, again, the best you can be. And the success of democracy is not equality of income. No, it's equality of opportunity. And only education, equality of education, quality education can produce equality of opportunity. And that's what I had. I was given the skill set and the ability to be able to be the best I can be, and I did okay. But I had the opportunity to do it. And that's what I want for I have 4 granddaughters. And that's what I want for my granddaughters to be. Each one of them is quite different. I've got a mighty successful businesswoman coming up like crazy. She's now going to graduate school of business to get her MBA at Duke. And I have an artist in Chicago. She lives in a totally different world, and so forth. So they're all coming along in a different ways. And that's the point, to allow people to be the best they can be. And education is the critical path forward. So I couldn't agree more with that.
So unfortunately, we're coming close to the end of our conversation. But before that, I
I'm
have a
sorry about
question
that.
from the
I
audience.
enjoyed this.
If you were to give an advice to Peter Georgescu in his 20s, what would that be?
To Peter Georgescu as what?
In his 20s.
In his 20s. I would say, as I said, I would say be optimistic, be positive, be resilient, and don't compromise with yourself. And if you embrace values, simple, basic human values, truth, honesty, caring, compassion, gratitude for what you have, no matter how little it is, if you have that, my goodness, sky's the limit for you. So go for it, I say. Men or women, regardless of color or sexual orientation or religion, whatever the heck it is, just go for it. Be yourself. Trust in yourself. Be self-reliant. But try your hardest to be a good person. The good people are going to win in the long term. I'm convinced of that. And I did believe that even in Romania, by the way.
By the way, have you ever imagined what your life would have been if you would have stayed in Romania?
Well, I would not be alive. I would clearly not have been alive. They kept us alive because there was a reason for that. We were bait. They kept us alive to use us as they did. And so it was very clear what the end would have been for us. We wouldn't be alive. Long, 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 like my grandfather did. There was no use to keep people like me, myself, or my family alive. So unfortunately, if I would have stayed there, the end would have been very clear.
But to end in a positive note, if is there one good thing that happened with this pandemic? Is there any positive consequence, if I can say so, about
Yes, yes,
the terrific catastrophe that has hit us?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that is, as I was trying to say, it just demonstrated that we have to work together regardless of nation. The pandemic doesn't care about borders. It doesn't care about borders, doesn't care about color, doesn't care about income equality or inequality or rich or poor. It doesn't care about that. And the only solution there is for this pandemic or the next pandemic and the pandemic after that is for us to be able to also be together, to have stronger families, to have stronger nations, which are willing to understand that the survival and prosperity of humanity is for all of us to understand that there's a common good. And whenever people are hurting anywhere in the world, the human family is hurt as well. And we've got to get there. And I think the pandemic is demonstrating that in spades today. I don't want it. I want it to go away. But by God, we better learn for this. You know, the 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 ultimate stupidity is trying to demand change by doing exactly what you've done before. That doesn't work.
Thank you
So
so
change
much.
is
I do
good.
hope we're going to continue this conversation either in Bucharest or in New York, and
I
that
look forward to
things
that.
are soon going to get better. Thank you so much for taking the time. It has been a wonderful conversation, and I, for one, have learned a lot from it. And I hope it was also enjoyable for you.
Very much so. Thank you very much. I'm very proud to be a Romanian American and very grateful in many ways for my past. I learned a lot. I've had tremendous advantages all my life from the lessons I learned as a youngster in Romania. So I very much made a beautiful lemonade out of some sour lemons. So I'm grateful for that, and I really mean that deliberately. I don't wish that kind of experience and learning for anybody else, of course, but I learned a lot, and I am the person who I am today for having gone through that. So thank you, Anna, for the opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your audience, and I wish you all well, and I wish all of us a better day tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I just want to say one more thing. We are also proud that you're a Romanian American, and thank you for everything. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you. The same to you all. All the very best.
Thank you so much.